British supercars come no better than Aston Martin's gorgeous DBS. A development of the more affordable DB9, arguably the best, certainly the fastest driver's car in this famous brand's lineup, remains a GT, but becomes a very exclusive and much more focused one. It's a future classic in the making. Somewhere between the clinical perfection of a Porsche and the extremes of a Ferrari lies a place for many people's idea of automotive heaven. A place of power and luxury beyond that of a 911, but without the feeling of slight excess marking models from Maranello. A place where you'll find this car, the Aston Martin DBS. Now, depending on who you believe, this is either a very expensive and only slightly faster version of its maker's existing DB9, or the most dynamic and rewarding Aston the company has yet made. We're here to find out which. Development from the DB9 is no bad thing from both a driving and a styling perspective, and has historical symmetry. The original 1967 DBS was, after all, itself a development of an existing model, then the DB6, and it too was launched by James Bond in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Now, 40 years on, this car renewed its license to kill, with Daniel Craig in Casino Royale, replacing previous Bond Pierce Brosnan's Vanquish on screen, if not exactly in the showrooms. Aston Martin's perspective, you see, was that this was a rather different car. One no longer trying to be a Ferrari 599 or 612, but one instead with its own clearer, more direct and very desirable agenda. Let's try it. For all its Le Mans wins and Nürburgring 24-hour race victories, Aston Martin tends to have fewer hardcore enthusiast owners than brands like Porsche or Ferrari. This DBS is more likely to be a reward for lifelong endeavour than a track day tool you've graduated to from a Porsche 911 GT3. So it's probable that many of those actually able to write a cheque for this car might be approaching it rather nervously, though they probably wouldn't admit the fact. Now, I've driven quite a few of these kinds of machines, and getting behind the wheel, even my heart's beating faster. Just how quick, you wonder, is a 191 mile an hour V12 supercar like this really going to feel? Let's find out. You start with this, a fancier take on the ignition key that Aston calls an ECU. That stands for Emotional Control Unit. Yes, really. I'm not going to go into what I think of that. Better just to thrust it into the dash where it glows red before the 48 valve 6 litre V12 engine explodes into life, preparing itself with 510 brake horsepower for a flex of your right foot. Now, that's actually less than the final version of the old Vanquish had. But as Aston Martin keeps telling us, this isn't a direct replacement for that car. So no, it's not trying to be the Ferrari 599 GTB that all the motoring magazines keep comparing it to. A machine with over 100 brake horsepower more and a price tag nearly £40,000 higher. This instead is very much its own car, or as much its own car as its DB9 underpinnings will allow. Let's deal with that first. It's true that the engine is basically the same hand-built V12 that you get in the kind of DB9 that would cost you £50,000 less. But in this case, it's been refettled to breathe more easily at higher revs, in the process releasing another 40 brake horsepower. Now, the high revs bit is important. Let's be clear. Unless you drive this car hard or you've the automotive empathy of Fernando Alonso, then initially it's unlikely to feel much faster than a DB9. And the figures seem to bear this out. A DBS is just 1 mile an hour faster flat out and just 0.3 of a second quicker to 60 than its stablemate. I can imagine many prospective owners undertaking a brief test drive and emerging distinctly underwhelmed. But they should persevere. Find somewhere you can extend this car a little further and unique qualities begin to emerge. Let's start with speed. Okay, so the 4.3 second 0 to 60 mile an hour figure that you get both in this coupe and the alternative Volante convertible version may be quite similar to that of the DB9, but the 0 to 100 mile an hour reading is over 2.5 seconds faster. Extend the thumping 570 Newton meters of torque into the sweet spot over 5,000 RPM and you can really feel it too. And if you're thinking that that isn't much use unless you have your own private runway, then don't worry. The differences between the two cars amount to more than that. The use of carbon panels, front wings and bonnet included, and ceramic brakes have saved this model over 65 kilograms in weight, which makes it feel more chuckable, even before you start factoring in the revised chassis, bespoke spring and anti-roll bar settings, wider track, and most importantly, adaptive suspension that makes this car a very different machine to drive. It's still a little wide for really tight country roads, one of a number of things that betray the fact that this remains at heart a Grand Touring GT rather than an out-and-out track day supercar. But whereas the abilities of a DB9 largely begin and end with a sporty B-road feel or a cross-country jaunt, those of this car can take in a lap of the Nürburgring on the way to Nice. Clutch, gear change, throttle and brilliantly good brakes all blend together in a far more driver-focused way than they do in a DB9. Yeah, the steering could do with a bit more feel and there's sometimes a bit of wheel spin that I could do without when accelerating hard in third, but otherwise it's largely perfect for its target audience. An Aston Martin with a sharper, more sporting edge, just as the engineers intended. Much of that sharper edge is provided by this car's adjustable intelligent damping system. Left to its own devices, the suspension serves up a beautiful balance of sharp suppleness, far nicer than you get in a Ferrari. While for track times, or for a particularly challenging road, you can firm it all up by pressing this suspension button on the dash. For track times, you might also want to use the track mode in the DSC stability control setup, which partly disables it so that you can let the back end slide out a bit. If you're the sort that is going to want to access these kinds of settings a lot, then you're also the sort that's likely to want the satisfying 6-speed manual gearbox that this car was launched with. The majority of buyers, though, are going to prefer to opt for the Touchtronic 6-speed automatic gearbox that I've got here, with its gorgeous leather-trimmed magnesium alloy steering column mounted paddle shifters and its sport option that increases the speed of ratio changes by 5%. Try it before you go with the stick shift. Either way, you've got quite an experience in store. Just as the 6-litre V12 beneath the bonnet has been breathed on by Aston Martin's engineers to differentiate it from that in the humbler DB9, so has this car's styling. And here, the breathing has definitely been of the heavy variety. Designer Marek Reichman was clearly told to pen something more aggressive, but without the kind of aesthetic excess that from some angles made the old Vanquish model look rather over the top. His brief was to develop a shape that was lower, wider and more purposeful. Something to create what the British Grand describes as the culmination of the DB bloodline. A car to bridge the gap between the more GT-focused DB9 and more track-focused Astons like the DB RS9 Racer. Whether they choose this coupe or the even shapelier Volante convertible with its electric thin-sulate hood foldable in just 14 seconds, most buyers will probably agree that he's succeeded. Inside, where wood has been banished and shiny aluminium switches and knobs on a glossy black centre console are further there to uniquely position this car, it's not quite so successful, with rather too many buttons, a number of which are concealed behind the large gear lever on the manual version, another reason to choose this automatic. But it's all very impressive, from the chronograph style dials to the soft mood lighting that bathes the cabin with blue illumination at night. And there's the familiar Aston mix of supple English leather and cool metal switches. The hand-built in England inscription on the tread plates as you open the doors says it all. A dangerous statement perhaps in years gone by when Astons hailed from a humble production line in Newport Pagnell, but one which the high-tech factory in Gaydon can nowadays fully endorse. Their attention to detail is exemplified by lovely detail touches like this pen that pops out of the bottom of the centre console. Behind you there's the option of 2 occasional rear seats that many DBS customers do without, but which I think might be rather useful from time to time. I suppose in their absence you do get a bit of an increase in luggage space from a bay that, because it's wide but not very long and rather shallow, is in standard form rather restricted. Just 186 litres in this coupe or 135 litres in the Volante convertible. Either way, the bespoke Aston Martin optional luggage kit is probably a must. It'll go nicely with your bespoke Aston Martin umbrella. Aston Martin has reduced the price gap between its DB9 and DBS models in recent times, but with DBS prices starting up around the £175,000 mark, you'll still need to pay a £50,000 premium for ownership of this car over its stablemate. If you want the Volante convertible version, you'll need to add nearly £10,000 on top of that. And for the Touchtronic automatic transmission that most customers will want, there's a £3,000 premium to pay on top of the variant that you select. Now, this kind of pricing sets this car in its own rather distinct market bracket, far grander than Porsche 911 turbos and Audi R8s, but not quite as ridiculously exclusive and expensive as, say, a Ferrari 599 GTB. True, a Ferrari 458 Italia, a Lamborghini Gallardo or a McLaren MP4 12C could be yours for similar money, but these are more track-focused cars for use on high days and holidays. Aston Martins, in contrast, tend to want to be used by their owners on an everyday basis. These are people looking for ultimate comfort on longer trips. With that in mind, I'd suggest that probably a closer rival for this car would be something like Mercedes SLS, a car that gets to within £7,000 of this Aston's asking figure and offers 60 brake horsepower more. But despite its gull-wing doors and Formula One heritage, the Mercedes isn't quite as exclusive. At the end of the day, people destined for Aston Martin ownership don't really tend to desire anything else. Which means that if you're of that sort, then if you can afford a DBS, then you'll probably buy one. If you can't, but can get close, then a DB9 will certainly be an acceptable substitute. Whether you choose coupe or Volante, ownership will be a suitably exclusive affair, with just 500 DBS units offered annually for worldwide sale. Standard equipment includes everything you'd expect from a car like this, including those gorgeous 20-inch alloys, sat-nav and a suitably sophisticated car alarm and tracking device to stop your car from falling into the wrong hands. You also get these ceramic brakes that are a pricey option on some rivals, plus a rather wonderful 1000 watt Bang & Olufsen Biosound audio system with acoustic lens tweeters that pop up from the corners of the dashboard. The airbag tally's a bit basic though, with no sign of the kind of curtain airbags that you'd expect to find on a car a quarter of this one's price. Just as well that all the usual electronic braking, traction and stability controls are on hand to keep you on the black stuff. It's possible to pay extra to do without the 10-way electrically adjustable, memory programmable and heated sports seats and replace them with competition-style bucket affairs, but unless you're a track day fiend, I wouldn't bother. There are better cars than this for track day fiends, and in any case, going for the bucket option, which is less comfortable, means that you have to do without the side airbags you get on the standard seats. Better options to consider are the bespoke luggage set and the Touchtronic automatic transmission. Now, no one buys a car like this and expects it to be cheap to run. Don't expect to average much more than 20 miles to the gallon, even if you do a fair few motorway miles. The official combined cycle fuel figures being 17.3 miles to the gallon for the manual and 18.2 miles to the gallon for the more efficient Touchtronic automatic. There's also the irritation of the fuel tank size being only 78 litres or 17 gallons, as opposed to, say, a Ferrari 599 GTBs at 105 litres, which will make the car seem even thirstier than it is. Insurance, as you might expect, is a top-line Group 20 on the 1 to 20 grouping scale. Better news comes in terms of depreciation. Because of this car's exclusivity, residual values will be as high, if not higher, than Ferraris. Look after your DBS carefully, and one day it'll be a classic. Servicing costs are inevitably high, as for any supercar of this kind, though the 10,000 mile intervals are longer than some rivals can offer. And bear in mind, if you're thinking of smoking rubber, that the tyres are bespoke DBS Pirelli Corsa affairs that you won't want to have to replace in a hurry. In a DBS, the most memorable journey you ever undertake might be a tour of classic European racetracks, but it might just as well be a journey to collect your dry cleaning. The mundane becomes magnificent at the wheel of one of these, from the moment of pure theatre that you get when starting it up, to the time that you park up, reluctantly get out, and take a last longing look back. Sure, its asking price is plenty to pay over that of a DB9, but use this car to the full and you'll get plenty in return. Those who approach one expecting a rival for a Ferrari 458 or a McLaren have got it wrong. It's less focused, but more usable than that, both over long distances and the day-to-day. A GT-style machine with a bit of added extra bite that amongst such cars fills an important gap between Audi R8s and 911s bought by those who can just about stretch to six figures, and the kind of Ferrari 599 for which you'd need a very large lottery win. Ultimately, for me, it's the ultimate Aston Martin. Just as for many, Daniel Craig is the definitive 007, so this car defines everything its brand should be.